Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. One of the important tasks of a machine of any kind is to repeat identical tasks again and again without making errors. This is one of the contrasting features when it comes to human beings. Even when we do tasks on a repetitive everyday basis, we are prone to errors, whereas a machine does it accurately without any kind of errors. This kind of repetition is called iteration. And when it comes to Python, when we want to iterate a task or a function multiple times over an element of a list, it has two kind of loops which will help us repeat these tasks. It's the while loop and for loop. Let's first understand what a while loop does. With the while loop, we can execute a set of statements as long as the condition is true. It could be any condition. So just like we had covered in our earlier videos where we created the if and else statements where we are creating conditions, just like that, as far as only when the condition is true, the while loop will run. Let me show you with an example. So let's say I create a variable called 10. Okay. Now before I run this, first let's try and understand what I'm doing in this line of code. I have defined a variable x with the value of 10 assigned to it. Now I am creating the while loop with the condition that if the value of x is greater than 0, then print the value of x and also decrease the value of x by 1. So in this case the value of x is 10, which is of course greater than 0, so the loop will start running. So what it's going to do is it will first print the value of x, which is 10, and then it will also decrement the value of x by 1. So it's going to do x is equal to x minus 1. So it will reduce the value to 9 and that will be reassigned to this variable again. That is what's going to happen. And this process will keep repeating as long as this condition is true. So 9 is still again greater than 0, so it will again run the loop and it will reduce to it. 8 is again greater than 0, so it's going to keep looping. Once the loop goes ahead and reaches the value 0 is when it will terminate. So when it reaches the value 0, the condition ultimately becomes false because 0 is not greater than 0. So the loop will terminate, and I've also stated over there, once the loop has reached the end, I've stated to print the string which is reach the end of loop as condition is false. I can mention any string, but this is just for your understanding. Now when I run this, look at how it works. So it keeps looping as far as the condition holds true. Once the condition becomes false, that is when the number of variable x is not greater than 0, it will terminate the entire loop. By the way, you see the second statement where I am reassigning the value of variable x to decrease x by 1. There is another way of how we can represent this. So this is another way of how to represent the same thing. It's going to perform the same task. Okay. By the way, both these expressions are doing the same task, so you don't need to get confused. It's just a simple trick in Python so that you don't have to write a long line of code. But if you're starting out, I'd say just do it the earlier way which I had shown you. Now let's try another example. Let me just go ahead and do x plus. So in this case I'm adding value of x by 1. Let's make this 0. lesser than. Let's also give a nested loop. So in this case, I've done the same thing. But here, I am not decreasing. I am actually increasing the value of x by 1. And I am stating that if the value of x is less than 100, while this condition is true, print the value of x and increment the value by 1. So in the earlier example, we told print the value of x and decrease the value of x by 1. But here I'm saying while the value of x is less than 100, print that value and also increase it by 1. So add 1 to it. Okay. And there is another nested loop inside that. So that's the bit of a tweaking which I've done. So in this nested condition, when the value of x is equal to 50, then print half century at that specific point. And once it has reached the end of a loop, that is when the value of x is let's say equal to or greater than 100, at that time terminate the loop. It's going to automatically terminate, and I want it to print the string which is full century. So let's see how it works. So that's a long list. You see it starts with 0 as x is 0. It keeps adding 1 at every step. And exactly at 50, it's printing half century just the way I want it. And when it reaches 100, as it determines the condition is false, it goes ahead and prints full century and terminates the loop. To shorten this loop, I can choose to increment the value by a bigger number. Since I put 1, so let's say I choose something like 5. Now the list will be much less. So it increments each step by 5 units. So you see 0, then it adds 5 to it, and again it adds 5 again, which becomes 10. I can add any value here. These are just a few examples of while loops. More importantly, to understand how the while loop executes the flow of statements, first check whether the initial condition is true or false. If false, the while statement will terminate the loop. If it's true, it will run all the statements and go back to step 1 again and continuously keep looping until the condition eventually becomes false. Like in this case, the loop iterated itself again and again, and at each step it checks whether it is less than 100. But once the loop reached the value of 100, the condition becomes false and it automatically terminates the loop. So this is what a while loop does. With the while loop, we noticed that it keeps iterating until the condition is false. That means as long as the loop is true, it will keep repeating the same process again and again. With the break statement, we can actually stop the loop even if the condition is true. Let me show it with a simple example. Let's say we have x is equal to 1. Okay, while x is lesser than 6. So this is the break statement, by the way. So in this case, what I've done is I've created a variable x with the value of 1. The while loops, the condition is that if the value of x is lesser than 6, only if that criteria is true, then run the loop. And that is to print the value of x. And essentially what might happen is it will keep running the loop, and once the value reaches 6, it will terminate it because the condition becomes false. But if I wanted to terminate the loop before, like while it's true, so in this case, while what I'm trying to say is, if the value of x is equivalent to 3, then break the loop. So when I run this, notice once it reaches the value of 3, I've stated the break statement and it goes ahead and terminates the loop. Otherwise, if I did not mention this break statement, it will just reach the value of 5 and it will terminate it. So let's see how that works. Notice that I just removed the break statement and it went and executed it up until 5. And once it's 6, I could have mentioned a string just for your reference, but I left it the way it is. So this is the usefulness of break statement when we want to terminate a loop even when the condition is being true. With the for loop, we can execute a set of statements, and these statements could be for each item, maybe in a list. Let's say we have a list of names and we wanted to print each of these names separately, or maybe kind of add some function to each of these names in, let's say, a list of 100 people. We can use a for loop that iterates through each element. And this doesn't just have to be a list. There are other kind of sequences in Python called as dictionaries, tuples, sets as well. And don't worry if you don't know what these are. I will be making separate videos on each one of them because there's a lot of in-depth concepts that needs to be covered for these sequences. But for now, just remember a for loop can go ahead and iterate through each element in one of these sequences and perform some kind of computation for each one of them. It's like a repetitive task. So let me give you an example of how a loop works, a for loop. Say I have a list of names like Mark, Harry, let's say Brian. Okay. Now if I wanted to go ahead and print the print each name, this is actually a very simple example of a loop. So this one prints each name in the names list which I had earlier. Okay. Actually, if you recall in one of our earlier videos in this series where we learned about functions, I had created a similar loop as well. Okay. Now, first thing, let me break it down to you. So when I say for I in names, that I is specifically me trying to tell for each name or the each element in this list, go ahead and print each element. Now it could be I, or I can choose for it to be anything. So I can put name in names. Sorry, I think I did a mistake here. Okay, my bad. Okay, it could be anything else. So I can even say for each name. So in for most conventions, we use it as I. It's very simple for our understanding. Okay. Now let's say I wanted to also do this with a single string. Now in this case, you notice I have 3 different strings in a list. But let's say I just have one string. Let's say something like for I in Mark. So it will iterate through each of these letters in a string as well. So that's one of the useful features of a for loop. It's not just about entire strings. Even if I add a string all by itself with how many ever letters, it will iterate. And this could be symbols, special characters. It will go and iterate through each one of them. Now, let me give you a more complicated example. Let's try to create some nested loops inside a for loop. Let's use our same earlier list. Yes, that wasn't by mistake. I put that dollar symbol at the end of Brian for a reason. I'll tell you why. Now I'm creating my nested loops. So what I'm doing is in the outer loop where it says for a name in names list, it's simple. I'm looping through each name, that is Mark, Harry, Brian, and Courtney. Okay. And in the first nested loop, which is for letters in name, I'm looping through each letter in each name. That is, it will first take out Mark, that is the first name, and it will loop through the letters of Mark, that is MARK, and this process will go on for both Harry, Brian, and Courtney. Okay, and after that, the next nested loop, which is an if conditional, which is if the letter in any one of these names is equivalent to the dollar symbol. Okay, if one of these strings contains the dollar symbol, then I want you to print the name that contains the string. I don't want you to just print the string, I want you to print the name of it. So essentially the output which I am expecting is Brian is what should be printed out as a result, because I'm saying once the if statement has figured out which of where it finds the value of dollar symbol to be there, I don't want you to print the dollar symbol, but I want you to print the entire string which contains this dollar symbol. And in this case, it should be Brian. I guess I did a mistake there. Okay, what was the error here? Okay, sorry, it's letters. So it's letter, it's supposed to be the same here. Now, yeah. So notice it's going ahead and printing the result as Brian. Now let's say if more than one name had this dollar symbol, it will make sure to go ahead and display all the names that contain this specific dollar symbol. So that's one of the advantages of how we can use a for loop. So think of this in a situation where you have hundreds and thousands of names. Okay, and you want to go ahead and pick out names with some specific maybe some initials or some specific characters in their name by using these qualities. If you would like to go ahead and pick out that name instead of traversing through the whole list manually, then you can use these kind of conditions. Just like the while loops that we had seen earlier, we can also use the break statement in for loops. So let me use the same example. If name. So same thing. So what was the purpose of the break statement? We can break the execution in between while it's traversing. So in the while statement, even if the condition is true before it reaches the end of it and terminates, we can terminate it in between itself by using the break statement. Even in this case, when I use the for loop, it will go ahead and iterate through each element. That is, it will only end it once it's reached the end, that is Courtney. But here I'm saying once you reach the name which is equivalent to Harry. So once you've gone ahead and iterated through that name specifically, print that name and also break the loop as well. I don't want you to continue to Brian and Courtney. And by the way, remember this is sentence case. So when I put small h here, it will not. So I have to use the capital H. So it prints Harry. But let's say I put a small h, it will just go ahead and not execute it. Okay, because it is not founded. So here it is basically going ahead and iterating through it. But since it has not gone ahead and found an equivalent match to the Harry with capital letters, it is not printing any result. So it needs to be, the sentence case is extremely important in this case. Okay, and I mean, I can use more for loops as well, but I was just trying to give you an example of how the break statement works here. That's the end of part 5 of this series. Stay tuned for the next part. We will be starting with sequences. We will start with the strings and explore more about the methods that strings provide and how we can manipulate them completely in depth. And in the following videos, we will be learning about lists, tuples, dictionaries, sets, and so on. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Have a good day.